In 1961, a man in a white lab coat gave a simple order: continue the experiment. On the other side of a wall, a person screamed in agony, and yet the subject obeyed. He pressed the switch. Another scream, another order, and this continued until silence. This wasn't a scene from a horror film. It was real, and it revealed something deeply disturbing about human nature: that most of us, given the right circumstances, would obey orders, even if it meant torturing an innocent person to death. To understand this experiment, you have to step into the world of the early 1960s. The scars of World War II were still fresh. The world had just witnessed the unimaginable cruelty of Nazi Germany. Millions of lives taken, entire families destroyed, and ordinary soldiers claiming they were simply following orders. How could that be possible? How could regular people, not monsters, not psychopaths, commit such horrific acts just because an authority figure told them to? One psychologist, Stanley Milgram, wanted to find out, and his curiosity would lead to one of the most controversial, disturbing, and revealing studies in the history of science. The recruitment Milgram's plan seemed deceptively simple. A small ad appeared in the local New Haven newspaper. Volunteers wanted for a study on memory and learning. Payment $4.50 for 1 hour of participation. It didn't look suspicious. It didn't hint at anything dark. It felt like an opportunity to help science. Men from all walks of life answered: teachers, factory workers, salesmen, engineers, clerks, all ordinary, everyday citizens. They had no idea they were stepping into one of the most infamous psychological studies in history. When each participant arrived at Yale University's psychology department, they walked into a clean, professional environment. The walls were lined with books. The air smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. The setting itself conveyed respectability. They were greeted by a calm, polite man wearing a crisp white lab coat. His demeanor was professional, yet reassuring, the kind of presence that made people instinctively trust and obey. There was no need for intimidation. Authority was woven into every detail of his appearance. In the waiting room sat another man, friendly and approachable. He was introduced as another participant. They exchanged small talk, perhaps even joked nervously about the experiment ahead. What the volunteer didn't know was that this fellow participant was an actor, and every word, every smile, every nod was part of the script. The experimenter explained that one person would be the teacher and the other the learner. To decide, they drew slips of paper. It looked fair, but both slips actually said teacher. The actor would always be assigned the role of learner. The real participant had no idea that the outcome was predetermined. The apparatus, the teacher, our unsuspecting volunteer, was led into a narrow room. Against the wall stood an imposing piece of equipment, a shock generator with 30 thick industrial-style switches. Each switch was neatly labeled with a voltage number, starting at 15 volts and increasing in steps up to a staggering 450 volts. Slight shock, moderate shock, strong shock, danger, severe shock, and, at the very end, a stark, ominous X. The panel looked real. Heavy wires ran from the machine into the adjacent room. Dials and meters gave it the weight of authentic laboratory equipment. The experimenter explained the procedure. The teacher would read a series of word pairs to the learner. If the learner responded incorrectly, the teacher must administer an electric shock. With each wrong answer, the voltage would be increased by 1 level. In the next room, the learner, the actor, was strapped into a sturdy chair with leather belts. Electrodes were fastened to his arms, and conductive paste was applied to prevent burns. It was all theatrics, but convincing enough to leave no doubt in the teacher's mind. What the volunteer didn't know was that the shock generator was a fake. The learner's cries, gasps, and pounding on the wall were all pre-recorded, but to the teacher, every reaction was real. The first shocks. The experiment began innocently enough. The learner made a few mistakes, and the teacher, following instructions, pressed the first switch. 15 volts. A small grunt of discomfort came from the other room. The teacher may have smiled nervously. It felt slightly wrong, but harmless. 20 volts. Another grunt. 30 volts. A slightly louder sound. The learner's voice was still calm, and the teacher relaxed into the routine. But then, things escalated. At 120 volts, the learner's voice rose sharply, complaining that the shocks were painful. At 150 volts, he shouted to be released. At 180 280 volts, his tone shifted from irritation to desperation. By 300 volts, panic had set in. The learner screamed that he could no longer tolerate the pain. He pounded on the wall, his voice cracking. "Let me out! I can't take it!" The teacher's hands might have trembled on the controls. They may have glanced toward the experimenter, seeking permission to stop. Instead, they were met with a steady gaze and 4 simple words: "Please continue." The breaking point. For many teachers, this was the moment of inner conflict. Their body language shifted. They leaned back in the chair, looked down at the switches, and hesitated. Some laughed nervously, a common reaction to stress. Others rubbed their temples or shook their heads. They questioned whether this was truly necessary. But the man in the white lab coat was prepared. Milgram had scripted 4 escalating prompts, spoken in a calm, unwavering tone. "Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on." There was no shouting, no visible aggression, just quiet, steady pressure, the kind that makes it difficult to refuse without feeling you're letting someone down. And it worked. One by one, participants turned back to the panel. 350 volts, 400 volts. The learner's voice faded into strained, pained gasps, then silence. Still, the experimenter insisted, "Please continue," and many did, delivering what they believed was the final, lethal shock. The results: when the experiment ended, Milgram revealed the truth. No one had been harmed. The learner was fine. It had all been an illusion. But the numbers were horrifying. 65% of participants, almost 2/3, went all the way to the maximum 450 volts. 100% went at least to 300 volts, despite hearing the learner's screams. These weren't sadists. They were ordinary men. They didn't want to hurt anyone, but they obeyed, simply because they were told to. Why they obeyed? Milgram's conclusion was chilling. People are far more likely to obey authority than we'd like to believe. Several psychological forces were at work. The authority effect. The lab coat symbolized knowledge and power. Obeying felt like the right thing to do. Gradual escalation. The shocks started small. By the time they became unbearable, the participant was already deeply committed. Diffusion of responsibility. The experimenter took moral responsibility, making the teacher feel less guilty. Social pressure. In a formal setting, defying authority feels uncomfortable, even shameful. The aftermath. When the study was published, the world reacted with shock and outrage. Some called Milgram unethical for deceiving participants and causing emotional distress, but others saw it as a necessary wake-up call. If obedience could lead ordinary people to inflict suffering in a lab, what did that say about soldiers, police, and even everyday citizens in real life? Milgram's work forced psychology to re-examine the boundaries of research ethics. Today, strict rules prevent such experiments from being repeated. The chilling truth: the Milgram experiment didn't just reveal something about science, it revealed something about us. Under the right circumstances, most people will obey authority, even when it means harming others. We like to think we'd resist, that we'd stand up and say no, but the numbers suggest otherwise. And maybe that's the most disturbing truth of all. The next time someone tells you to do something that feels wrong, remember this experiment. Ask yourself, are you following your conscience or just following orders? If this story made you think differently about human nature, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more hidden truths and dark psychology stories. Because sometimes the scariest monsters are human.